The coffee was still warm when Sarah's world shattered. One moment, she was serving pie to the regulars at Murphy's Diner. The next, she was pressed against cold brick, a stranger's breath hot against her neck. "Please," she whispered. But her voice disappeared into the alley's shadows. Then, footsteps, a child's voice cutting through the darkness. "Daddy, please save her." Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The fluorescent lights above Murphy's Diner buzzed like dying insects, casting everything in that particular shade of yellow that made even the youngest faces look tired. Sarah Chen wiped down the same stretch of counter for the third time, her cloth moving in slow, methodical circles while her eyes tracked the clock above the coffee machine. 9:47 p.m. 13 more minutes, and she could lock up, count the till, and walk the 4 blocks home to her studio apartment, where a frozen dinner and yesterday's newspaper waited. The routine had become a comfort predictable, in a way that most of her 32 years had not been. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Marcus Williams slide into his usual booth by the window. He was early tonight. Usually, he and his daughter Emma didn't come in until closer to 10, after her soccer practice and his shift at the auto shop. "Coffee?" Sarah called out, already reaching for the pot. "Please." His voice carried the weight of the day grease under his fingernails, shoulders that curved forward like he was still bent over an engine. "And maybe some of that apple pie, if there's any left." Emma, 7 years old with pigtails that never stayed quite straight, climbed into the booth across from her father. She had a coloring book and a box of crayons that had seen better days, most of them worn down to nubs. "Hi, Miss Sarah," Emma said, not looking up from her drawing of what appeared to be a castle with too many towers. "Hi, sweetheart. Working on your masterpiece? It's for you." Emma held up the page. "Daddy says you work really hard, so I made you a present." Sarah felt something warm spread through her chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten how to name. "That's beautiful, Emma." "Thank you." She poured Marcus's coffee and cut a generous slice of pie, the kind of portion that would have gotten her in trouble with the manager if he'd been there. But Frank had gone home hours ago, leaving her alone with the register and the trust that she wouldn't give away the store. The pie plate clinked against the table as she set it down. Marcus's fingers brushed hers as he reached for his fork. Just for a second, but long enough for Sarah to notice the calluses, the small scar across his knuckle, the way he pulled back as if he'd touched something hot. "Long day?" she asked. "Transmission gave out on a '98 Honda. Owner wants it fixed for less than the parts cost." He took a bite of pie and closed his eyes. "This is good. Really good. My grandmother's recipe. She teach you to make it?" Sarah's hand went to her throat, fingers finding the small jade pendant there. "Before she died, yeah. She said every woman should know how to make something that brings people comfort." Emma looked up from her coloring. "My mom used to make cookies, before she went to heaven." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus set down his fork, and Sarah saw the way his jaw tightened, the quick glance he gave his daughter before looking out the window. "I bet they were delicious," Sarah said gently. "She burned them sometimes," Emma said with the matter-of-fact honesty that only children possessed. "But Daddy ate them anyway, and said they were perfect." Marcus's smile was small and distant. They were perfect. Sarah refilled his coffee without being asked, and the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that existed between people who understood that some stories couldn't be told all at once, that some grief had to be carried in small portions. The bell chimed again, and Sarah turned to see a man in a torn jacket stumble through the door. His eyes were unfocused, movements jerky and unpredictable. She'd seen him before, usually outside the liquor store 2 blocks over, sometimes sleeping in the doorway of the closed pharmacy. "We're about to close," Sarah said, keeping her voice even. The man looked around the diner as if he'd never seen the inside of a restaurant before. His gaze lingered on the cash register, then moved to Sarah, then to Marcus and Emma in their booth. "Just want some coffee," he said. But his hands were shaking, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah's skin prickle. She glanced at Marcus, who had straightened in his seat. Emma was still coloring, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "I can get you coffee to go," Sarah offered. "On the house. Don't want it to go." The man slid into a booth near the door, blocking the exit. "Want to sit. Want to eat." Sarah's training kicked in the customer service smile, the practiced calm. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. Drunk ones, angry ones, men who thought buying a cup of coffee gave them the right to comment on her body, her accent, her life choices. But something about this felt different. "What would you like to eat?" she asked, moving behind the counter where the phone was, where she could call the police if needed. The man's attention drifted to Emma, who was now looking up from her coloring book with wide, curious eyes. "Pretty little girl," he said. Marcus was out of his seat before Sarah could blink. "Time for you to leave." His voice was low, controlled, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung loose at his sides ready. "Didn't finish my coffee." The man hadn't touched the cup Sarah had placed in front of him. "Yes. You did." Marcus took a step forward. "Come on. Let's go." Emma was watching now, her crayons forgotten. Sarah wanted to tell her to look away, to go back to her drawing, but she couldn't find her voice. The man stood slowly, and Sarah saw the knife a split second before Marcus did. It wasn't big, just a folding blade, the kind used for opening boxes or cutting rope. But in the harsh fluorescent light, it looked deadly. "Nobody tells me what to do," the man said. Everything slowed down. Marcus moved first, stepping between the man and his daughter. Sarah reached for the phone, her fingers fumbling with the numbers. Emma made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a word. The man lunged. Marcus caught his wrist, and they crashed into a table, plates and silverware scattering across the floor. Sarah was screaming, though she couldn't hear her own voice over the sound of her heartbeat. She pressed 911, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't tell if the call was going through. The two men struggled, knocking over chairs, slamming into the counter. The knife glinted as it changed hands, then disappeared, then reappeared. "Emma, get behind the counter," Sarah shouted. But Emma was frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her face, watching her father fight for their lives. Then, the man broke free and stumbled backward. He looked around the destroyed diner with wild eyes, as if suddenly realizing where he was, what he'd done. Marcus was bleeding from a cut on his forearm, but he was still standing, still between the man and his daughter. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, the man ran. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully as he disappeared into the night, leaving behind overturned tables, broken plates, and the metallic smell of fear. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto the stool behind the register. Her whole body was shaking. Marcus was examining his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was very small. He turned to her, and Sarah saw him force his features into something resembling calm. "I'm okay, baby. Just a little cut." But Emma wasn't looking at his arm. She was looking at his face, reading all the things he was trying to hide. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Marcus sat down heavily in the booth and pulled her onto his lap. "I'm sure. We're all okay." Sarah finally found her voice. "I called the police. They should be here soon." She grabbed the first aid kit from under the counter and knelt beside Marcus. His sleeve was torn, and the cut underneath was deeper than he'd admitted. It would need stitches. "This is going to hurt," she said, pressing gauze against the wound. Not as much as explaining to Emma why some people do bad things. Sarah looked up at him. In the harsh diner lighting, with blood on his shirt and worry lines carved deep around his eyes, Marcus Williams looked like every tired father who'd ever tried to shield his child from a world that didn't deserve her innocence. "You saved us," Sarah said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. You didn't. Emma was quiet against her father's chest, her small fist clutched around a red crayon. She'd started coloring again, not the castle this time, but something else. Sarah couldn't see what it was, but the little girl's movements were careful and deliberate, as if she was trying to draw her way back to safety. The police arrived 12 minutes later, 2 officers with tired eyes and questions that would keep them there for another hour. They took statements, photographed the damage, promised to look for the man who'd probably be 3 towns over by morning. Marcus needed 7 stitches. The hospital was a 10-minute drive, but his truck was in the shop, and Sarah's shift wasn't technically over until the police finished their report. "I can drive you," she offered. "We can call a cab." At this time of night, in this town, Sarah was already grabbing her purse, her keys. "Come on." Emma fell asleep in the back seat of Sarah's Honda during the drive to the emergency room. In the rearview mirror, Sarah could see her curled up with her coloring book, the red crayon still clutched in her small fist. Marcus was quiet, cradling his injured arm and staring out the passenger window at the empty streets. Sarah wanted to say something, "Thank you," or "Are you okay?" or "I'm sorry this happened." But the words felt too small for what had just occurred. At a red light, she finally spoke. "Emma was drawing you." "What?" "In her coloring book. After everything happened, she was drawing you." Sarah glanced in the mirror again. You were standing in front of her, and she was safe behind you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with exhaustion. "I couldn't let anything happen to her. She's all I have left." The light turned green, and Sarah pressed the accelerator, carrying them through the empty streets toward the hospital, where Marcus's arm would be cleaned and stitched and bandaged, where Emma would wake up in a plastic chair and ask if her daddy was okay. But Sarah was thinking about something else, about the way Marcus had moved without hesitation, had placed himself between danger and the people he loved. About the way Emma had drawn him afterward, not as a hero in some grand gesture, but simply as a father doing what fathers do. She was thinking about comfort and safety, and the kind of courage that didn't announce itself with fanfare, but showed up when it mattered most. In the back seat, Emma stirred and mumbled something in her sleep. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but Marcus turned to look at his daughter, and his expression was so tender, so full of love and worry and fierce protection, that Sarah had to look away. Some things were too private to witness, even in the rearview mirror of a car driving through the dark. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Sarah sat in an orange plastic chair that had probably been there since the 80s, watching Emma sleep across her father's lap while they waited for the doctor to finish with his stitches. It was nearly 2 in the morning. The waiting room was mostly empty except for a teenager with a skateboard and a swollen wrist, and an elderly woman who kept coughing into a tissue. The fluorescent lights were dimmer here than at the diner, but they still cast that same sickly yellow glow that made everyone look like they were recovering from something. Emma stirred and opened her eyes, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where's Daddy?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "He's with the doctor," Sarah said gently. "Getting his arm fixed up. He'll be back soon." Emma sat up, her hair sticking up in the back where it had been pressed against the chair. She still had her coloring book clutched against her chest. "Is he hurt bad?" "No, sweetheart. Just a cut. The doctor is putting some special bandages on it." Emma nodded seriously, as if this explanation made perfect sense. She climbed down from the chair and walked over to where Sarah was sitting. "Can I sit with you?" "Of course." Emma curled up in the chair beside her, small and warm and smelling faintly of crayons and children's shampoo. Sarah wasn't used to this, the easy trust of a child, the weight of small responsibility. "Miss Sarah?" "Yes? Are bad people everywhere?" The question hit Sarah harder than she'd expected. She thought about her own childhood, about locked doors and whispered conversations, about the way her mother had taught her to walk with her keys between her fingers and never go anywhere alone after dark. "No," she said finally. Most people are good, but sometimes the bad ones are loud, so they seem like there are more of them than there really are. Emma considered this. Daddy says that's why we have to be careful but not scared. Your daddy is very smart. He cries sometimes, Emma said matter-of-factly. At night, when he thinks I'm sleeping. But he doesn't know I can hear him. Sarah's chest tightened. People cry sometimes. Even daddies. It doesn't mean they're not strong. I know. Mommy used to cry too. But she was the strongest person in the whole world. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. His left arm was in a sling, and there were tired lines around his eyes, but he managed to smile when he saw Emma. How's my girl? Emma launched herself at him, careful to avoid his injured side. Does it hurt? Not much. 7 stitches and some fancy medicine. He ruffled her hair with his good hand. The doctor says I'll be fine. Sarah stood up, suddenly aware that she'd been holding this space for them, this temporary family in crisis. And now they would go home, and she would drive back to her empty apartment and try to forget the sound of breaking plates and Emma's small, frightened cry. Thank you, Marcus said, looking at her over Emma's head. For staying. For driving us. For. Anyone would have done the same. No, he said, echoing her words from the diner. They wouldn't have. The drive back was quieter than the drive there. Emma fell asleep again almost immediately, and Marcus stared out the window at the empty streets of their small town. Sarah wondered what he was thinking about, whether he was replaying the fight, or thinking about work tomorrow, or trying to figure out how to explain violence to a 7-year-old. I should probably take a few days off, he said suddenly. Can't work on cars with one arm. Do you have sick leave? Some. His laugh was bitter. Not enough. Sarah knew about not enough. Not enough money, not enough time, not enough options. It was the anthem of people like them, working 2 jobs to afford rent, choosing between groceries and gas, counting every dollar, and hoping nothing broke down or went wrong. Murphy's is closed tomorrow anyway, she said, for cleanup and repairs. Maybe Emma could come with me while I deal with the insurance people. If you want. Marcus looked at her, and Sarah realized she'd offered without thinking, without considering what it meant to volunteer for a day with someone else's child. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. They pulled up in front of a small duplex with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. The porch light was out, and Sarah wondered if Marcus had forgotten to replace the bulb, or if he simply couldn't afford to keep buying them. Emma woke up as the car stopped. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward between the seats. Miss Sarah, do you want to see my room? Emma, it's very late, Marcus said. Miss Sarah needs to go home. But Sarah found herself saying, maybe for just a minute. The inside of the house was small but clean, with second-hand furniture that had been arranged with care. There were photos on the mantel, Marcus in a wedding dress shirt, a woman with Emma's eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin. The 3 of them at some kind of carnival or fair. The woman was beautiful in an understated way, with laugh lines and gentle hands and the kind of smile that suggested she found joy in ordinary moments. Emma's room was painted pale yellow, with glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling. There was a twin bed with a patchwork quilt, a bookshelf made from milk crates, and drawings taped to every available wall surface. I did all of these, Emma said proudly, gesturing to her gallery. Sarah looked closer. There were rainbows and flowers and stick-figure families, but also more complex drawings, detailed pictures of cars and houses and people. Emma had talent, real talent, the kind that suggested she saw the world differently than other children. These are incredible, Emma. Daddy says I'm going to be an artist when I grow up. I think your daddy might be right. Marcus appeared in the doorway, and Sarah realized she'd been in his house for less than 5 minutes. But already she'd seen too much. The careful budget evident in every choice. The love evident in every detail. The weight of raising a child alone in a world that wasn't always kind to single fathers. Emma, time for bed, Marcus said. You have school tomorrow." Emma hugged Sarah around the waist, quick and fierce. "Thank you for taking care of Daddy." After Emma was tucked in and Marcus had walked Sarah to her car, they stood for a moment on the sidewalk, under the broken streetlight. The night was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on the highway, and a dog barking somewhere down the block. "She likes you," Marcus said. "She's easy to like." "Not everyone thinks so. Single dad with a kid, most people see complications." Sarah thought about this. Maybe they're looking at the wrong things. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, as if he was testing the weight of each word. "Would you like to come to dinner sometime? I mean, I can cook. Nothing fancy, but Emma would love it. And I." He stopped, shook his head. "Sorry. It's been a long night. I'm not thinking straight." "I'd like that," Sarah said, surprising herself. "I'd like that very much." The next morning came too soon and too bright. Sarah woke up in her studio apartment, with sunlight streaming through thin curtains, and the memory of Marcus's voice asking her to dinner. For a moment, she lay in bed and let herself imagine what that might look like. The three of them around a small kitchen table, Emma chattering about school, Marcus's easy smile in his own space. Then she remembered the diner, the broken plates, the insurance adjuster she was supposed to meet at 10 o'clock. Murphy's looked worse in daylight. Tables were overturned, chairs were scattered, and there was a dark stain on the floor where Marcus had bled. Sarah stood in the doorway and tried to process the destruction, to translate it into the kind of language insurance companies understood. The adjuster was a thin man in his 50s, who took photographs and made notes on a tablet, and asked questions about the value of vintage salt shakers and whether the coffee machine still worked. He was professional and thorough, and completely uninterested in the story behind the damage. "Acts of violence are covered," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "You'll need a police report number and receipts for anything you want replaced." Sarah had brought copies of everything, organized in a manila folder that Frank had given her years ago for important documents. She watched the adjuster calculate their loss in dollars and cents, reducing the chaos of the night before to line items on a claim form. It was nearly noon when he finished, and Sarah was locking up the diner when Emma appeared at her elbow, like a small, persistent ghost. "Daddy said I could come help you today." Sarah looked around and saw Marcus across the street, leaning against a lamppost with his arm in its sling. He raised his good hand in a wave. "How long have you been waiting?" "Not long. Daddy wanted to make sure you were okay." Emma was wearing a backpack and carrying her coloring book, clearly prepared for a day of adventure. Sarah looked at the list of things she needed to do grocery shopping for her grandmother's recipes. Laundry. The mundane tasks that filled her days off. None of it seemed important anymore. "Want to help me make something?" "What kind of something?" Sarah thought about comfort, about the way Marcus had closed his eyes when he tasted her grandmother's apple pie. Cookies. The kind that make everything feel a little bit better. They spent the afternoon in Sarah's tiny kitchen, Emma standing on a chair to help measure flour and sugar, while Sarah told her stories about her grandmother, how she had come to America with nothing but a jade pendant and a handful of recipes, how she had built a life from scratch in a place where she didn't speak the language, how she had taught Sarah that food was love made visible. Emma was a good listener, asking thoughtful questions, and taking her job as assistant baker very seriously. She cracked eggs with careful concentration and stirred the dough with both hands, her tongue sticking out slightly in the way children do when they're focusing. "My mommy used to let me help cook," Emma said, as they rolled the dough into balls. "But she wasn't as good as you. I'm sure she was wonderful. She tried really hard. But sometimes the food tasted funny, and Daddy would eat it anyway and say it was delicious." Sarah smiled. "That's what people do when they love each other. They eat the burned cookies and pretend they're perfect." "Do you love my daddy?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She looked down at Emma, who was arranging cookies on the baking sheet with mathematical precision, and tried to figure out how to answer honestly without saying too much. "I think your daddy is a very good man." "That's not what I asked." Emma had her mother's directness apparently. Sarah put the cookies in the oven and set the timer for 12 minutes. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Daddy says that when he doesn't want to tell me something." They sat at Sarah's small table to wait for the cookies to bake. Emma opened her coloring book to a fresh page and began drawing something new. Not a castle this time, but a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. "Is that your house?" Sarah asked. "No, it's a different house. A bigger one, with a garden and a dog." Emma added carefully drawn flowers around the edges. "And 3 people instead of 2. Sarah's heart did something complicated in her chest. She watched Emma color with the same concentration she'd brought to cookie making, adding details that most 7-year-olds wouldn't think to include: curtains in the windows, smoke coming from the chimney, a bird sitting on the roof. The timer went off, and Sarah pulled the cookies from the oven. They were golden brown and perfect, and they made her apartment smell like her grandmother's kitchen, like comfort and safety and home. "Can we take some to Daddy?" Emma asked. They packed half the cookies in a tin that had once held her grandmother's sewing supplies, and Emma carefully carried it like precious cargo as they walked the 4 blocks to Marcus's house. The afternoon was warm, and other children were playing in yards and riding bicycles on sidewalks, filling the air with the sounds of summer ending and school beginning. Marcus answered the door with flour in his hair and a look of mild panic on his face. "How did it go with the insurance?" he asked Sarah, then looked down at Emma. "Did you have a good time?" "We made cookies," Emma announced. "The best cookies in the whole world." "I was trying to make dinner," Marcus admitted, stepping aside to let them in. "It's not going well." The kitchen smelled like something burning. Sarah could see a pot on the stove, with smoke rising from it, and what appeared to be the remains of a grilled cheese sandwich, charred beyond recognition in a pan. "Maybe we could help," Sarah offered. "I don't want to impose, Daddy," Emma interrupted. "Miss Sarah is really good at cooking, and she already helped me make cookies. She can probably fix dinner too." Marcus looked between them, and Sarah saw him calculating his pride against his practicality, his independence against the simple fact that his 7-year-old daughter was right. "If you're sure, you don't mind." Sarah was already moving toward the stove, turning off burners and opening windows. "What were you trying to make?" "Spaghetti and grilled cheese. Emma's favorite. We can work with that." They spent the next hour cooking together in Marcus's small kitchen. Sarah made a simple tomato sauce while Marcus, despite his injured arm, managed to grate cheese and slice bread. Emma set the table with careful precision, folding napkins and arranging the cookie tin in the center like a centerpiece. It was domestic in a way that Sarah had never experienced. Growing up, dinner had been a silent affair, her parents tired from work, the television providing the only conversation. Later, living alone, she'd eaten most of her meals, standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone. But this was different. This was the kind of dinner she'd seen in movies, but never thought was real. Emma chattering about her day at school, Marcus asking questions about her friends and her teacher, Sarah watching them interact with the easy rhythm of people who knew each other completely. "Miss Sarah," Emma said as they finished the spaghetti, "will you stay for cookies?" Sarah looked at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "If it's okay with your dad." "It's more than okay," Marcus said quietly. They ate cookies at the kitchen table while Emma drew more pictures, houses and flowers, and families of stick figures. The sun was setting outside the window, painting the kitchen in warm golden light, and Sarah realized she hadn't thought about her empty apartment, or her frozen dinners, or her predictable routines all day. "I should go," she said finally, when Emma started yawning, and Marcus began clearing the dishes, despite his sling. "Let me walk you to your car," Marcus offered. Outside, the evening air was cool and full of the sounds of a neighborhood settling into night. Children being called inside, television programs starting, the distant rumble of traffic on the main road. "Thank you," Marcus said as they reached Sarah's car. "For today, for everything. Emma's easy to spend time with." "It's not just Emma." Marcus stepped closer, and Sarah could smell his aftershave, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Sarah, I—" He stopped, shook his head, stepped back. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. I just thank you. For all of it." But Sarah knew it wasn't nothing. She could see it, in the way he looked at her. Could feel it, in the space between them that seemed charged with possibility. She thought about Emma's drawing of the house with 3 stick figures, about the way Marcus had smiled when she'd offered to help with dinner, about the moment in the hospital, when he'd said her name, like it meant something. "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "That dinner invitation. Does it still stand?" His smile was slow and warm and full of something that looked like hope. "How's tomorrow night?" Sarah changed clothes 3 times, before settling on a simple blue dress that her grandmother had always said brought out her eyes. She'd never been nervous about dinner before, not like this, with her hands shaking as she applied lipstick and her stomach doing complicated things every time she thought about Marcus's smile. It wasn't a date. Not really. Emma would be there, which made it something else, something more complicated and somehow more terrifying than any date Sarah had ever been on. She brought wine anyway, and flowers for Emma, and the kind of bread her grandmother used to make on Sundays when company was coming. Marcus answered the door, wearing a button-down shirt that looked like he'd ironed it twice, his hair still damp from the shower. His arm was out of the sling, though Sarah could see he was still favoring it. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah's cheeks warm. "How's the arm?" "Better. Doctor says I can go back to work on Monday, light duty." Emma appeared behind him wearing a dress that was clearly her Sunday best navy blue with small white flowers, her hair brushed and held back with a clip that matched. "Miss Sarah, you came. I brought you something." Sarah handed Emma the small bouquet of daisies she'd picked up at the grocery store. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "For me? Really? Really?" "Daddy, look, Miss Sarah brought me flowers." Marcus's expression was soft as he watched his daughter cradle the bouquet like it was made of gold. "They're beautiful, baby. Just like you." The house smelled like garlic and herbs, and Sarah could hear something sizzling in the kitchen. Marcus had been cooking, really cooking. Not just the basic survival meals of a single father trying to keep his child fed. "I hope you like chicken," he said, leading her toward the kitchen. "It's not fancy, but Emma helped me make it special." The table was set with care, actual cloth napkins instead of paper, candles that Emma must have helped arrange, the good plates that were probably saved for holidays and important occasions. There was even a small vase in the center, where Emma had arranged her daisies. "This is lovely," Sarah said, and meant it. Emma picked out the music. Marcus gestured toward an old stereo in the corner that was playing soft jazz, the kind of thing Sarah's grandmother used to listen to while she cooked. Dinner was chicken with lemon and rosemary, roasted vegetables, and rice that was perfectly fluffy, despite being made by a man with one functioning arm. Marcus had clearly spent time on this meal, had wanted it to be special, and Sarah found herself thinking about the last time someone had cooked for her with this kind of intention. She couldn't remember. "Daddy made dessert too," Emma announced. "But it's a surprise." "Emma," Marcus warned, but he was smiling. "I won't tell what it is, but it's your favorite, Miss Sarah." Sarah looked at Marcus with raised eyebrows. "My favorite?" "Apple pie," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I found a recipe online, and Emma helped. It's probably not as good as yours, but—" "You made me apple pie." "We made you apple pie," Emma corrected. "I helped with the apples. Daddy let me use the special peeler." Sarah felt something complicated happening in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine Marcus had poured, nothing to do with the candles or the flowers or the careful way he'd arranged everything. It was bigger than that, more dangerous than that. It was the feeling of being seen, of being important enough for someone to learn her favorite things and try to recreate them. "Tell me about work," Marcus said as they ate. "Is the diner going to be okay?" "Insurance will cover most of it. Frank wants to reopen next week." Sarah took a sip of wine. "I keep thinking about that man though. About what might have happened if you hadn't been there. Someone else would have helped. Would they?" Sarah looked at him across the table. "I've worked in restaurants for 12 years, Marcus. I've seen a lot of situations where people chose to look the other way." Emma was listening with the intense focus that children brought to adult conversations they didn't quite understand but knew were important. "Daddy's brave," she said matter-of-factly. "He protects people." "That's what daddies do," Marcus said. "We protect the people we care about." But Sarah caught something in his tone, a weight behind the words that suggested he was talking about more than just that night at the diner. After dinner, while Marcus cleared the table, Emma showed Sarah her latest drawing. It was the house again, the one with 3 stick figures, but this time she'd added more details: a garden with specific flowers, a dog that looked suspiciously like a golden retriever, curtains in the windows that were drawn back to show light inside. "It's beautiful, Emma. Tell me about the people." Emma pointed to each figure in turn. "That's Daddy. That's me. And that's—" She hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where Marcus was running water for the dishes. "That's who?" "Someone nice. Someone who makes Daddy smile and knows how to make good cookies." Sarah's throat tightened. "Emma, do you think people can be lonely even when they're not alone?" The question was so adult, so perceptive, that Sarah had to take a moment before answering. "What do you mean?" "Like, Daddy has me, so he's not alone. But sometimes I think he's still lonely, for someone who's not his little girl." Sarah looked toward the kitchen, where Marcus was washing dishes with careful one-handed movements, his shoulders curved forward in that way that suggested he was carrying more weight than anyone could see. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that everyone needs different kinds of love. The love between a daddy and his daughter is very special. But it's different from other kinds of love." Emma nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Do you get lonely, Miss Sarah?" "Sometimes. Even though you have a job and an apartment and everything?" "Even then." Emma considered this, adding a few more flowers to her drawing with careful strokes of her crayon. "Maybe lonely people should find each other," she said finally. Marcus appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. "Ready for dessert?" The apple pie was imperfect in all the best ways, the crust slightly uneven, the filling a little too sweet, the edges just barely burned. It was nothing like the precise, practiced pies Sarah made at the diner. But somehow it was better because Marcus had made it for her, because Emma had helped, because it represented hours of effort and attention and care. "This is delicious," Sarah said, and watched Marcus's face light up with relief and pride. "Better than the diner pie?" "Different. But yes, better." After Emma went to bed, a process that involved 3 stories, 2 glasses of water, and a detailed negotiation about whether she could stay up just 5 more minutes. Sarah and Marcus sat on his small front porch with glasses of wine and the comfortable quiet of people who were learning to be comfortable with each other. "She likes you," Marcus said, watching a neighbor walk their dog under the streetlights. "She's easy to like." "Most people don't think so. 7-year-olds can be intense." Sarah thought about Emma's direct questions, her careful drawings, the way she saw things that adults tried to hide. "She's observant. That's not a bad thing." "No, but it makes dating complicated." Marcus looked down at his wine glass. "Not that I've done much of that lately." "When was the last time?" "Honestly, before Emma was born. Lisa was. She was it for me. After she died, I couldn't imagine wanting to be with anyone else." Sarah waited, sensing there was more. "But Emma's getting older, and she asks questions about why other kids have mommies, and she doesn't. Why Daddy doesn't have someone special, like her friends' parents do." Marcus took a sip of wine. I started thinking maybe it wasn't fair to her, keeping our world so small. And now? Marcus looked at her, and in the dim porch light, his expression was open and vulnerable in a way that made Sarah's chest tight. Now I'm thinking maybe I was wrong about not being able to feel that way about someone again. The words hung between them like a bridge that Sarah could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. She thought about her empty apartment, her predictable routines, the way she'd organized her life around not needing anyone, not being disappointed, not risking the kind of pain that came from caring too much. Then she thought about Emma's drawings, about the way Marcus had made her pie, about the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself for the first time in years. Marcus? Yeah? What you said about protecting people you care about. Sarah, I know this is complicated. I know I come with baggage, and Emma, and a life that's already set in certain ways. I'm not asking for anything you can't give. What if I want to give it? He went very still. What? What if I want to be part of this? Of your life? Emma's life? What if I want to try? Marcus set down his wineglass and turned to face her fully. Are you sure? Because once Emma gets attached, really attached, it would break her heart if you changed your mind. What about your heart? My heart's already in trouble. Sarah reached for his hand, careful of his injured arm. His fingers were warm and calloused and real, and holding them felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. I don't know how to be part of a family. Neither do I, anymore. We could figure it out together. From inside the house came the sound of Emma talking in her sleep, murmuring words they couldn't quite make out. Marcus smiled. She does that when she's happy. Sleep talks about good days. Sarah thought about all the good days that might be ahead. Saturday mornings making pancakes, helping with homework, teaching Emma more complicated recipes, watching Marcus smile without the weight of carrying everything alone. It was terrifying and wonderful, and more than she'd ever let herself want. Tomorrow's Sunday, Marcus said. Emma likes to go to the park, feed the ducks. If you want to come, I'd like that. And maybe after, we could start planning that bigger house. The one with the garden and the dog. Sarah laughed, remembering Emma's drawing. She told you about that? She tells me about everything. Including the fact that she thinks you'd make a good mommy, because you know how to make things that taste like love. The words hit Sarah like a physical force. She thought about her grandmother, about the way food could carry love across generations, about the possibility of being someone who mattered to a little girl with artistic hands and two perceptive eyes. Marcus? Yeah? I think I'm falling in love with your daughter. Just my daughter? Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him, and saw the man who had stepped between danger and his child, without hesitation, who had learned to make apple pie because it was her favorite, who was brave enough to risk his carefully constructed life for the possibility of something better. No, she said quietly. Not just your daughter. Marcus leaned closer, and Sarah could smell his aftershave, could see the small scar on his knuckle, could feel the warmth of his breath against her cheek. Sarah? Yeah? Can I kiss you? Instead of answering, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, then deeper, more certain. It tasted like wine and possibility, and the kind of hope that Sarah had forgotten how to feel. When they broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers, and they sat in the quiet darkness, holding hands and listening to Emma's sleep murmurs and the distant sound of the highway. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we take it one day at a time. One dinner, one drawing, one bedtime story at a time. And if it doesn't work? Then we'll figure that out too. But Sarah? Marcus squeezed her hand. I have a feeling it's going to work just fine. From inside the house came the sound of Emma's voice, clearer now. Miss Sarah stayed for cookies. Miss Sarah stayed for dinner. Miss Sarah stayed forever. Marcus laughed quietly. She's not talking in her sleep. How do you know? Because she only calls you Miss Sarah when she's awake. In her dreams, you're just Sarah. What does that mean? It means, Marcus said, pulling her closer, that she's already decided your family. 3 weeks later, Sarah woke up in her own apartment, but found herself thinking about pancakes and Sunday mornings, and the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through Marcus's small kitchen. It had become a routine Sundays at the park, feeding ducks that had grown fat and expectant, followed by lunch at Marcus's house, where Emma would show Sarah her latest drawings, and Marcus would try new recipes with varying degrees of success. But this Sunday was different. This Sunday, Emma had asked if Sarah could sleep over, like a real family does. Marcus had looked panicked when Emma made the request, his eyes finding Sarah's across the dinner table with an expression that asked a dozen questions he couldn't voice in front of his daughter. Sarah had smiled and said, maybe someday, when they'd been together a little longer, and Emma had accepted this with the patience of a child who was used to waiting for good things. Now, lying in her twin bed in the studio apartment that suddenly felt too small and too quiet, Sarah wondered if someday was closer than she'd thought. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Marcus. Emma wants to make you breakfast. Says she has a surprise. Can you come over? Sarah was already reaching for her clothes. She found them in the kitchen at 8:30 Emma, standing on her usual chair, while Marcus supervised her attempts to flip pancakes with his good arm. His left arm was nearly healed now, the stitches removed, but he still moved it carefully, as if testing its reliability. Sarah. Emma launched herself across the kitchen, and Sarah caught her in a hug that smelled like syrup and childhood and home. I see you're the chef today. Daddy's teaching me, but I'm better at it than he is. That's probably true, Marcus said, kissing Sarah's cheek in greeting. The gesture was casual now, comfortable, but it still made her stomach do complicated things. Emma had indeed made breakfast pancakes that were slightly lopsided, but golden brown, bacon that was perfectly crispy, orange juice poured into the good glasses. She served Sarah with the serious attention of a restaurant owner, asking if everything was cooked properly and whether she needed more syrup. This is delicious, Emma. Where did you learn to cook like this? Daddy taught me some things, and Grandma Lisa's mom sent me a cookbook for my birthday. Sarah glanced at Marcus, who was cutting his pancakes with careful precision. She'd heard about Lisa's mother, a woman who lived 3 states away and visited twice a year, who sent birthday cards and Christmas presents, but had never quite figured out how to be present in Emma's daily life. She called yesterday, Marcus said quietly. Wants to take Emma for a weekend next month. That's nice, Sarah said, though something in Marcus's tone suggested it was more complicated than that. She wants to meet you, Emma announced. I told her all about you, and she said she wants to see if you're good enough for our family. Marcus looked mortified. Emma, that's not exactly what she said. It's what she meant. But don't worry, Sarah. I told her you make the best cookies in the world, and you know how to fix Daddy when he's sad. Sarah's throat tightened. When is your daddy sad? Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. Sometimes at night, when he thinks I'm sleeping, and sometimes when he looks at pictures of Mommy, but not as much since you started coming over. The honesty of children was sometimes brutal. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was staring down at his plate, with the expression of a man who'd just had his emotional state dissected by a 7-year-old. Emma, he said gently, grown-ups feel sad sometimes. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. I know, but it's better when Sarah's here. You smile more. After breakfast, they walked to the park as usual. But today Emma had brought a different coloring book, one with blank pages that she could fill with her own designs. She settled on a bench between Sarah and Marcus and began drawing something new, her tongue sticking out in concentration. She's right. You know, Marcus said quietly, while Emma was absorbed in her artwork. About the smiling. Marcus, I didn't realize how much I'd shut down until you came along. I thought I was doing fine, keeping it together for Emma, but I was just surviving. Sarah watched Emma add careful details to her drawing flowers in a garden, birds in trees, a sun with a face that looked decidedly cheerful. What about now? Now I remember what it feels like to want something for myself, not just for Emma. To think about the future as something more than just getting through each day. Emma looked up from her drawing. Sarah, do you want to have babies? The question came out of nowhere, delivered with Emma's characteristic directness. Sarah felt Marcus go still beside her. That's a very personal question, sweetheart. I know. But I was wondering because if you and Daddy get married, maybe I could have a little brother or sister. I've been asking for one for a really long time. Sarah's cheeks were burning. She could feel Marcus looking at her, could sense the weight of his attention and his careful silence. Marriage is something grown-ups have to think about very carefully, Sarah said finally. Have you been thinking about it? Emma, Marcus intervened. Maybe we should talk about something else. But I want to know, if Sarah's going to be part of our family, don't we get to ask her questions? Out of the mouths of babes. Sarah looked at Emma's expectant face, then at Marcus, who was clearly wishing the earth would open up and swallow him whole. Yes, Sarah said finally. I have been thinking about it. Emma's smile was radiant. And I think your daddy and I need to talk about these things privately first, before we include you in the conversation. But you're not saying no. I'm not saying no. Emma returned to her drawing with the satisfied air of someone who had gotten the information she was looking for. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter add a swing set to her elaborate garden scene. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She's been asking a lot of questions lately about what it means to be a family, whether you're going to stay, whether I'm going to leave. Yeah. Sarah thought about this, about the fear that lived behind Emma's questions. The way children who had already lost one parent learned to hold love carefully, ready to let go if necessary. What do you tell her? That I don't know. That I hope not. That some things are up to the grown-ups to figure out. And what have you figured out? Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I've figured out that I love you. And that scares the hell out of me because I can't protect Emma from getting hurt if this doesn't work out, and I can't protect myself either. The words hung in the air like a declaration, and a question rolled into one. Sarah felt the weight of them, the trust they represented, the vulnerability of a man who had already lost everything once and was brave enough to risk it again. Daddy, Emma said without looking up from her drawing. Sarah loves you too. I can tell. Emma, she gets the same face you get when you look at her, all soft and happy and scared at the same time. Marcus laughed despite himself. Since when did you become such an expert on love? Since I started paying attention. Emma held up her drawing. Look, I made us a new house. This time, the house was bigger, more detailed, with a wraparound porch and a garden that took up half the page. There were 4 stick figures now instead of 3, 2 tall ones, 1 medium-sized one, and 1 very small one with pigtails. Who's the little one? Sarah asked. My baby sister. Her name is Hope, because that's what Mommy always said, that no matter how sad things get, you have to keep hoping for good things. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she couldn't quite explain. She looked at Marcus, who was staring at his daughter's drawing, with an expression of wonder and terror and love so profound, it was almost painful to witness. Emma, he said quietly, sweetheart, we can't just draw people into existence. I know. But we can draw what we want, and then work really hard to make it happen. That afternoon, after they'd taken Emma home for her nap, Marcus walked Sarah to her car as he always did. But instead of the usual quick goodbye, he leaned against the driver's side door, effectively trapping her between his body and the vehicle. About what Emma said, Marcus, she's 7. She doesn't understand. What if she does? He stepped closer, and Sarah could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell his aftershave, and the faint scent of syrup from breakfast. What if she understands better than we do? What are you saying? I'm saying I love you, Sarah Chen. I'm saying I want to wake up next to you and make you coffee and fight about whose turn it is to do the dishes. I'm saying I want Emma to have a mother who knows how to make cookies and fix scraped knees and teach her that love doesn't always leave. Sarah's breath caught. Marcus, I'm saying I want to marry you. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday soon. I want to give Emma the family she's been drawing, and I want to stop being afraid that happiness is something I'm not allowed to have twice in one lifetime. The words hit Sarah like a physical force. She thought about her empty apartment, about the careful distance she'd maintained from anything that might hurt her, about the way she'd built her life around not needing anyone. Then she thought about Emma's drawings, about Sunday morning pancakes, about the way Marcus had made her apple pie and called her beautiful, and protected her without thinking twice. What if I'm not good at it? She whispered. At what? Being a mother, being a wife, being part of something bigger than myself. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. Sarah, you've been part of our family since the night you stayed with Emma in the hospital. You've been a mother to her since you taught her to make cookies and listened to her questions about love. You've been my partner since you helped me understand that I deserve to be happy again. What about Lisa? What about Emma's real mother? Lisa will always be Emma's mother. Nothing changes that. But love isn't finite, Sarah. Emma has room in her heart for both of you, and so do I. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine it, the house from Emma's drawings, the garden, the dog, the second child who might have Marcus's eyes, and Sarah's stubborn chin. It was everything she'd never let herself want. Everything that had seemed too risky, too good to be true. Ask me, she said quietly. What? Ask me properly. Marcus's smile was slow and warm and full of hope. He took her hands in his, right there in the afternoon sun beside her beat-up Honda. Sarah Chen, will you marry me? Will you be Emma's second mother, and my second chance, and the person who makes our house feel like home? Yes, she said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff and flying at the same time. Yes, I'll marry you. Marcus kissed her then, deep and sure and full of promise. And Sarah tasted the future on his lips. Sunday mornings and bedtime stories, and the sweet chaos of a life lived with purpose and love and hope. From the house came the sound of Emma's voice, calling through the screen door. Daddy, Sarah, are you kissing? Because if you are, that means you're definitely getting married, and I can tell Grandma Lisa's mom that I was right. They broke apart laughing, and Sarah realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the quiet contentment she'd mistaken for peace, but this bright, terrifying, wonderful chaos of loving people who loved her back. We should probably go tell her officially, Marcus said. In a minute. Sarah pulled him closer. I want to remember this moment. Just us, before everything changes. Everything already changed, Sarah. The night you stayed to help Emma in the hospital. The morning you taught her to make cookies. The first time you said my name like it mattered. This is just making it official. Emma appeared on the porch in her pajamas, her hair sticking up from her nap. Are you coming in? Because I have something to show you. They walked into the house together, and Emma led them to the kitchen table where she'd left her coloring book open to a new page. This drawing was different from the others, simpler, more immediate. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, My Family, written across the top in careful 7-year-old letters. I made this while you were outside, Emma said proudly. Do you like it? Sarah looked at the drawing, at Emma's hopeful face, at Marcus's expression of wonder and love and gratitude. She thought about the man who had attacked her in the diner, about the moment when everything could have gone differently, about the strange and beautiful way that violence had led to grace, that fear had led to love, that asking for help had led to finding home. I love it, she said, and meant every word. I love all of it. Emma hugged her around the waist, fierce and trusting and complete. Over her head, Sarah met Marcus's eyes and saw her own amazement, reflected there, The shock of people who had expected to live careful, quiet lives, and instead found themselves claimed by something wild and generous and true. Outside, the afternoon sun was painting the kitchen golden, and somewhere in the distance, other families were having their own Sunday dinners, their own quiet revelations, their own moments of recognizing that love was not something to be hoarded, but something to be shared. But here, in this small house, with its second-hand furniture and careful dreams, Sarah Chen had found what she'd been looking for, without knowing she was looking for anything at all. She had found her people, and they had found her. If you enjoy this story, I want you to click the subscribe button for more stories like this.